Hello, I'm Bilge, and this study, Searching for Structure in Silence, Voice Mismatches in VP Ellipsis, is a project conducted at the Experimental Syntax Lab at University of Delaware in collaboration with Benjamin Bruening, Anna Koppy, Satoshi Tomioka, and Rebecca Tollan. The overall goal of this project is to explore whether there is structure building under ellipsis. This is an interesting question because an important task for arriving at the correct interpretation of a sentence is building a correct structural representation of it. Over the past several decades, a large body of psycholinguistic research has focused on how we do this task. And one area of debate concerns what happens in sentences like the following. One of the professors was supposed to teach a new language, but they didn't. Although the second conjunct after but does not involve any pronounced string of words after did not, this clause is interpreted as they didn't teach a new language. This is called verb phrase ellipsis. In verb phrase ellipsis, comprehenders are generally able to recover the omitted material quickly and accurately. This phenomenon has evoked a great deal of interest because VP ellipsis raises important questions about how language comprehenders mentally construct the missing linguistic material under VP ellipsis. VP ellipsis is well attested in English. Here are some examples extracted from the corpus of contemporary American English. Sometimes projects included affordable housing, but far too often they did not. The finance ministry favored setting up a sovereign wealth fund while the central bank did not. My only concern was that he would pop up and panic, but he did not. As you see, there is no string pronounced after did not in all of these sentences, but comprehenders can easily interpret what they mean. Therefore, verb phrase ellipsis has evoked a lot of interest regarding what happens when the parser encounters the silence after did not. This is related to the overarching question of what kind of representation should be given to the verb phrase ellipsis. There are two approaches that attempt to answer this question. First approach is the structural approach. According to the structural approach, the elided VP contains the full syntactic structure at some level of representation, but this structure is just not pronounced. Accordingly, when VP ellipsis is encountered in a sentence like this, one of the professors was supposed to teach a new language, but they didn't. The parser builds the full representation of teach a new language once didn't is encountered. An alternative approach is the proform approach. This approach assumes no structure at the ellipsis side. Instead, there is a silent proform at the ellipsis side, commonly called as a pointer, and the function of the pointer is to point back to its antecedent for the recoverability of the meaning. Accordingly, when VP ellipsis is encountered at the point of didn't here, the parser reactivates the meaning of teach a new language, but it does not build the structure of this verb phrase. The existing psycholinguistic evidence so far hasn't been able to reliably distinguish between these two approaches, as reviewed in a 2014 paper by Parker and Phillips. There are several studies that present evidence for what information is accessed at the ellipsis site. However, these results might just be showing the effect of reactivation of the antecedent. As Parker and Phillips notes, reactivation does not necessarily provide decisive evidence for the existence of the full syntactic representation in the ellipsis site. For instance, Shapiro and colleagues use a cross-modal priming paradigm to investigate priming at the ellipsis site. They present sentences like the following. The mailman bought a tie for Easter, and his brother, who was playing volleyball, did too, according to the sales clerk. And they present a target noun for the object noun tie and for the subject noun mailman in the 2 star positions in this sentence. They find only the target for tie is primed only in the 2nd star position, indicating that the object is reconstructed in the ellipsis site, but the subject is not. Similarly, Snyder and Runner use an eye-tracking paradigm, and they find increased looks to the semantic and phonological associates of antecedent object noun. Crucially, these findings show what is accessed at the ellipsis site, but they do not provide direct evidence for the creation of syntactic structure at the ellipsis site. More recently, structural priming effects have been found in verb phrases ellipses. Sean and colleagues report that NPPP prime increases NPPP production in verb phrase ellipses. This finding, again, is interesting as it suggests different kinds of syntactic information, like subcategorization frames, is reactivated at the ellipsis site. Importantly, however, reactivation might induce priming of the structure, but again, this does not necessarily show that the parser builds that structure independently of reactivation. So, considering that the existing evidence cannot reliably distinguish between reactivation versus structure building question, our study aims to fill in this gap. We ask the same question: do we reactivate old structure or build new structure under verb phrase ellipsis? And to answer this question, we look at cases of voice mismatch in VP ellipsis. But first, we should understand what voice mismatch refers to. Let's look at a sentence like in 1. A new language was supposed to be taught in the fall semester, but no new language was because the schedule was too tight. The first conjunct of this sentence involves the passive form of teach, which is taught, and the second conjunct is understood to involve passive taught as well. And this is unlike the mismatch in 2. A new language was supposed to be taught in the fall semester, but no professors could because the schedule was too tight. In 2, the second conjunct involves the active teach, whereas the first conjunct involves the passive thought. 2 illustrates a voice mismatch. Importantly, the verbs like teach are irregular verbs, and the active stem has a different form from the passive stem for these type of words. In our study, we use voice mismatches in VP ellipsis as in 2 in comparison with their voice matching counterparts as in 1. This manipulation helps us disentangle the predictions of structural approach and the proform approach. Structural approach predicts that the parser builds the VP structure for thought in 1 and for teach in 2. However, proform approach predicts teach thought lemma is reactivated in both 1 and 2. And note that teach does not appear in either of these sentences, but thought appears in both. And according to the structural approach, then it will be more likely to misidentify teach as in having appeared in 2 compared with the 1. And this is because the parser will create the structure for teach a new language in 2, but not in 1. As a short note on grammaticality, the grammatical status of the voice mismatched verb phrase ellipsis has been debatable. One view argues that voice mismatch is acceptable under VP ellipsis. This is extensively discussed in Merchant's 2013 study with many examples. And here are some of his examples. The janitor must remove the trash whenever it's apparent that it should be. This information could have been released by Gorbachev, but he chose not to. It engaged them in a way that I didn't think they could be that early in the morning, kind of like all of us right now. On the other hand, not every voice mismatched verb phrase ellipsis is acceptable. For instance, English speakers find sentences like one unacceptable. This information was released, but Gorbachev didn't. And once the indicative is replaced by should have been, as in to, this information should have been released, but Gorbachev didn't, the sentence becomes much more acceptable. And the contrast between 1 and 2 has been experimentally attested as well. Based on this contrast, an alternative view argues that voice mismatch under VP ellipsis is ungrammatical. And according to this approach, processing and pragmatic factors lead to repair and increased acceptability in 2. More recently, Stockwell argues that voice mismatched verb phrase ellipsis is grammatical as long as a standard focus-based condition supplemented with a contrast condition is met. Accordingly, for instance, 2 is grammatical because via accommodation, readers understand that this information should have been released by Gorbachev. Therefore, the ellipsis is an alternative to its antecedent. Contrast condition is met via contrasting intentionalities here, based on the contrast between the ordinary meaning, so should have been and didn't. However, the sentence becomes ungrammatical when the first conjunct involves was released, as in 1, because the accommodation necessary for the antecedent is contradicted by the clause with VP ellipsis. To minimize the concerns about the grammaticality, we ensure that all our stimuli abide by Stockwell's conditions. As in 3, a new language was supposed to be taught in the fall semester, but no professors could because the schedule was too tight. 3, for instance, meets the standard focus condition. Via accommodation, comprehenders understand that a new language was supposed to be taught by a professor. Therefore, the ellipsis is an alternative to its antecedent. And here, Stockwell's contrast condition is met again via contrasting intentionalities, as the contrast holds between the ordinary meaning of was supposed to and could. All stimuli in our experiment meet focus and contrast conditions of Stockwell, therefore grammaticality is not a concern. In our study, we use voice mismatched verb phrase ellipsis in a word recall experiment using irregular verbs in English to answer the reactivation versus structure building question. We created materials like in 1 using verbs that have different stems for active and passive, like teach, taught. Participants read sentences like 1 either with a matching or mismatching voice. Sentences were presented on the screen as a whole before disappearing at key press, and there was no time limit. After each sentence disappeared, a single target word appeared on the next screen, like teach for these examples. And the task was to identify whether this word had been presented in the earlier sentence. In all cases, the correct answer is no. We implemented a 2-by-2 within subjects within items design by crossing the voice and the relatedness of the target word. In the critical related conditions, the target was the active verb form teach, which does not appear in the sentences. In the unrelated baseline condition, the target word was a length matched word like worst, which also does not appear in these sentences. We created 16 item sets following this design and put them in 4 Latin square lists. We added 20 filler questions to each list. The fillers do not involve ellipses. Correct answer was yes for half of the fillers and no for the other half. We also added 4 attention check questions. All stimuli is presented in a pseudo-randomized order, and the experiment is coded on PCI-BEX form. We recruited 128 participants on Amazon's Mechanical Turk, all native speakers of English. 11 participants' data was excluded due to their inaccuracy rates. In this experiment, the dependent measure was the rate at which participants correctly rejected the target word teach as having appeared in the sentences. And here are our results. This figure nicely illustrates our results. The proportion of correct rejections plotted on the y-axis and the voice of the elided VP on the x-axis. Overall, results show a higher rejection accuracy for unrelated targets, which corresponds to gray bars, compared with the related targets in black bars. This manifests itself as a significant main effect in the analysis. In line with this, reaction time results also show that unrelated targets were rejected faster than related targets. Crucially, our analysis also revealed an interaction of target and voice. There was a significantly higher rejection accuracy for passive-related than active-related. This shows that it is harder to reject teach as appeared in the sentences when an active verb is elided. This supports the structural view. There was no other significant effects revealed by our analysis. All in all, we found higher proportion of rejection accuracy for passive-related than active-related. We reason that this is because readers posit the active form of the verb in the active condition, but not the passive condition. In the active condition, a new language was supposed to be taught in the fall semester, but no professors could. Active verb form teach is reconstructed at the ellipsis site, which leads to an illusion that the target word teach appeared in the sentence proper. In the passive condition, however, a new language was supposed to be taught in the fall semester, but no new language was. The passive form taught is reconstructed this time, so there was no illusion for the active form. Importantly, and unlike previous studies, our results are not easily explainable as reactivation of the antecedent because the antecedent is the same across conditions, which is taught in these examples. Our results show that people have the illusion that teach appeared in the sentence in the active condition, but not in the passive. Reactivation cannot account for this. Rather, this finding suggests that the parser constructs a representation of the ellipsis that includes a verb phrase in the ellipsis sign. And this is consistent with the view that new structure gets built under ellipsis rather than old structure being reactivated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to remind everybody we have the microphone, so please feel free to approach a microphone and state your name and your affiliation as you ask your question. And I'm too close. Okay, so don't stand where I stood, stand further back.
Hi,
Hi.
Colin Phillips, Oxford and Maryland. This is very interesting, is a clever way of getting at this topic. I wondered if you could say something more about something you said at the end, which was, you said there was no illusion in the passive-passive condition, but there were 35% errors. That was the biggest thing that happened, is that they were really surprisingly quite bad at that. So I wonder if you could say a bit more about what you think is going on there, because they were struggling. And is there maybe some other type of baseline that you could measure that against in order to better understand that?
Yep, that's a great question. Thank you. Let me just pull up the figure. Yep. Yeah, so the idea is that in the active condition, because the active verb is reconstructed, there is this illusion that the target word teach appeared in the sentence, but not in the passive condition, because people were faster at rejecting it in the passive condition. And that's a great question that you ask, because we still see some type of effect, right, in the passive condition too. I think we need to think more about it, but as a quick answer to your question, I think that might be due to the fact that in the passive form, the participants still see the verb, teach, it's just not in the correct form, like they see thought. So maybe that might be interfering, maybe the meaning, the semantics might be interfering when it comes to giving a decision in terms of rejecting the target word. But yeah, that's a great question.
I mean, I wonder if you could do some things where you would either take out the ellipsis altogether or have other different auxiliaries, but without changing the voice, which would make it easier for you to identify specifically what's the contribution of mismatch.
Yeah, we could definitely try this without the voicing manipulation. Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Brown-Schmidt, Vanderbilt. This is a really interesting presentation. There's a long history of looking at verbatim memory for linguistic stimuli going back to Beth Loftus. And one of the things I'm wondering here is to what extent the effects you're observing are reconstruction of the sentence at the moment the person is processing the probe, as opposed to processing effects at the time the sentence was initially encountered. Probably the answer is a little bit of both, but I was curious about your thoughts about that, as probing verbatim memory is a little bit different than the processing question.
Yep, great question. Thank you. Yeah, like I mentioned, I think it's hard to explain these results with the reactivation because, like, when we look at our sentences in active and passive condition, we see that the form thought appears in both, but teach appears in neither of them. So it seems very unlikely that, the results are because of the reactivation. Rather, it looks like we're really seeing the effect of structure building. So it's like comprehenders would still build the form teach in the active form and taught in the passive form, right? And the effect that we are seeing looks like it's more the effect of this structure building rather than the reactivation, because we also have the same word thought in the antecedent clause across conditions. So that's why our results are not easily explainable as reactivation of the antecedent. Does that answer your question? Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Dave Kush, University of Toronto. This is very nice. Just related to questions about baselines, in order to figure out whether this is specifically due to ellipsis, I was wondering if it might be worthwhile to run a study where you just have, instead of comparing the worst conditions, having a condition where you just don't have ellipsis at all.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. Yeah, I think we might think about it. Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Lisa Levinson, University of Michigan. Thank you. This is interesting stuff. I was wondering about the potential impact of two things. One that are maybe related. One of potential priming, the kind of teach-taught kind of priming, but also in a different way of how the participants might be when they're participating, what the instructions are and how, I can imagine participating in this study and thinking that taught and teach, that counts as seeing that word. So whether there's priming going on or whether they, especially on Amazon Mechanical Turk, how clearly they understand how they should handle that kind of case. I was wondering your thoughts on that and whether there's any participant patterns, like for some participants, they are kind of doing that behavior more than other participants, for example?
Yeah, great questions. Becky, do you have an answer to that?
You want to use the mic so others can?
Thank you. So we did have a series of practice trials which were specifically about this verb form and participants were given feedback on the practice trials. We haven't looked at individual participant effects, but we can certainly do that, and we can certainly look for ordering effects as well, which might be something we want to follow up with. We also just had quite a conservative cutoff. So we had participants had to get 3 or 4 comprehension questions correct and over 80% on the fillers that didn't involve ellipsis to make sure that people were paying attention to the task.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's thank Bilge again for the
Thank you.
excellent talk.